Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my review of Frostpunk 2. So at the front, I've been playing this in pre-release. I'm very fortunate. I've had it for about 7 days. I've put 20 plus hours into it. I've clocked the main campaign and I've put a chunk of hours into the spin-off mode, the Utopia Builder as it's called, the survival sandbox. Suffice to say, I've got a bit of a grasp of what this game is and what it isn't, and I will endeavor to do the best I can to convey that because it's a little bit more layered and complex than some might think. If you've never been to this channel before, hello, welcome. I'm just a normie, right? I'm a dickhead with a microphone, a man of the cavemen, as it were. And I kind of review, not under sufferance, but a little bit ironically, in that I have a lot of resentment for professional reviewers that sniff their own farts and take themselves seriously. The reason that I am sort of emphasizing that point is that while I can tell you right now that what Frostpunk is doing, it's doing some interesting, unusual stuff, and some of it's really quite brilliant. And I've enjoyed my time with it, and I could see myself playing it as well. So, like, if you want just a black and white answer, yes, it's a really good game. It is great. However, I feel like the developers may have not fully grasped what exactly made the first game great and popular, and I feel like they have opted to cater to the kind of terminally online psychopathic 1%, right? The people that write walls of text about the politics of Frostpunk, and also the people that write guides about 10,000 hours of very hard mode on survival mode. And I feel like the sweet spot in the middle, which is not insignificant, the 75% of the player base of Frostpunk 1, that, and look, anecdotally over the years, I've polled people out of curiosity that probably played the main scenario once and enjoyed it, and maybe dabbled in some of the other scenarios, which were kind of cool, and most of them never even started up the survival mode at all, the sandbox thing. A lot of them were just taken in by a really well synergized mixing of colony building mechanics with some really interesting and unique, like the radial building and the heat mapping and all this sort of stuff, and the exploring in the Frostland. All of this was pretty unique and still is gold standard in the colony building space. But then they married it in with this narrative, which was really interesting. And it wasn't, browbeaty or anything like that. It was just a really good story about surviving, and there was an intimacy of the colony at the scale that it was. And I suppose the cherry on the top was it does kind of hold a mirror up and say, hey, look, how far you pushed your colony to the brink and past the brink of, humanity and morals, etc. But essentially it has this built-in finale of, yes, you survived, but at what cost, right? Okay, cool. Bit of food for thought, but most people that played it would have gone, oh, that's interesting. Might have a think about that. No, I'm going to go to bed and wake up tomorrow and go dig a fucking hole to feed my family, right? This is what normal people thought of Frostpunk 1. Frostpunk 2 has gone all in on a new mechanic, which is the political faction push-pull interplay of kind of trying to people please everybody and deal with factions that are ideologically opposed. I will say it handles it as tastefully as you possibly could, right? But the thing is, there is a kind of paradoxical dilemma that the kind of people that are interested in that, i.e. I want a political simulator first, are probably politically captured. And I'm not even saying if it's a left or right thing or whatever, but I feel like as commendable a job as 11-bit has done with the political sim part of it, I feel like the majority of the base going into this don't fucking want that. Like, they just aren't interested in politics. Otherwise, games like Democracy 3 would actually be a gangbuster success, but it's fucking not. It's not mainstream. So they've decided to kind of lean in, and good for them. I mean, it's their product. They can do whatever they want, but they've decided to lean into something that I feel like the install audience cachet that they managed to create as a base in the first game are not going to be interested in that, no matter how brilliant it is. But even then, the people that are interested in it are probably not going to be very happy that you make their opposing ideology not look evil. So yeah, like the dot point of that is, I feel like the only people that they made that system for is for them, for the studio, and good for you. If you're an artistic mind, that's great. But at the same time, being third highest wish-listed game on Steam at the time of this recording, 150,000 followers to boot. It feels like a Last of Us 2 kind of scenario. And the reason that got backlash is because whether you like it or not, Games aren't really art. Not first. Not when you're asking for X dollars and you're selling them to people, and then you're in the business of sequels where you have people that are now pre-ordering, wish listing, and getting ready to give you money as a sort of trust exchange, not because of your artistic vision, but more because they want you to give them a sequel to what you proved the first time. And look, I don't make the rules. That's just how commodity exchange and fandom works. So to their potential detriment, 11-bit have decided to say, fuck it, we're doing whatever we kind of want, and they haven't pandered to the core audience, and I think you might end up with a fuckload of people buying this game expecting one thing, and then kind of not getting what they paid for. As far as the campaign goes, what they've clearly tried to do is just do the same thing again, but kind of do it 5 times the size and the scale. And in every way, that is definitely a misstep. So yeah, the political system that no one wants or asked for is actually really quite good, and we'll circle back to it. But the bits that you're probably looking for the most, like I said, my fellow normies, they kind of shit the bed on it, right? They've decided to scale it up in such a way that the game is in like 5 or 6 chapters, and they're all a continuation. It's a contiguous campaign, much like if you were playing some sort of first-person shooter or whatever, where you carry your ammunition and your health over from level to level. But in this case, you do that with your city. And the problem is, if you fucked your city up, there's no real backsies other than going back to a save. Again, like a different genre. And the thing is that this will inevitably be compared and contrasted to the fact that Frostpunk 1 got it right. And even in the Frostpunk 1 scenario, I bet you anything, there are a bunch of people that would have got to the end sort of part of that scenario, because that main scenario is the main campaign and it goes for a couple of hours. But I think a lot of people probably would have failed at the finale where it ramps up for the finale, right? And then they'll uninstall and never play it again and swear off it, right? Well, prepare to have that experience expounded exponentially, because this game just keeps ratcheting it up. It tries to go for a big finale. But my city, I suppose you could argue this is exactly what they wanted, but my city was kind of shit the whole time through. And it was sort of sunk cost fallacy. I didn't want to go back and play another bloody 6 hours doing it perfect. So you persevere, and I kind of just scraped over the line. Again, it might be the desired experience of the developer, but you're dealing with sequel territory. People aren't going to like this. People aren't going to like the fact that you can't go restart chapter at chapter 3 and just start from a fresh some standard save. It won't let you do that. You can only go back to your previous saves. And the nature of how the political system works in this, the push-pull, and it kind of sort of gets dedicated to certain areas. So if you do push, say you push your entire colony in the adaptation direction, it will start penalizing you super heavily if you don't stay with adaptation. It'll have this sort of like cornerstone moment crossover. And so my point is, if you find yourself frigging 5-6 hours into the campaign and you kind of want to pull it back and reel it in or change direction or whatever, that's not going to happen. You're kind of committed. And you might find, and time will tell, that people will have themselves a campaign file that's kind of fucked. 3 hours out, but they don't know it yet. And 3 hours from now, they're about to have the most miserable realization. And so I just find myself asking, why did you do this? They're obviously trying to go for more bombast, bigger, better, and honestly, it's worse that way. In fact, the entire scale of this game is leveled up. Every tick in time is a day. When people die, it'll have pop-ups saying 300 kids killed each other in the Rumble, or 1,000 dudes got crushed under the ice, or like it's become impersonal. So that intimacy that I hinted at earlier, that kind of was the glue that held Frostpunk 1 together, that's not here. Because they've decided to go for a larger society builder, you become incredibly disconnected. Then further to that, similar to making the one scenario kind of 5 times longer, they're almost trying to get you to play all the scenario spin-offs in one instance. So you now have satellite colonies that you jump between, and they aren't really just a sandbox colony. Without getting into spoilers, they will have their own shtick, their own flavor, their own sort of hazards to overcome. They're more of a puzzle, more of a challenge, and it wants to just run all of this shit on your computer at the same time. And it starts getting into that, end game anno problem where how far you make it into the game is going to be limited by your computer's hardware. I had to turn all my shit right down to medium and lower resolutions and all sorts of stuff because it was just getting so out of control. And I'm like, why did you do this? Because previously you just put them into little vignette separate scenarios and that worked. I feel like no one was asking for this, and all you've done is introduced a shitload of problems by just trying to take what was magic in the first game and make it more, when I would almost argue people kind of want to see you do magic again. Once again, I'm an 11-bit Studios fan. They don't do sequels. They do new games with new concepts in different genres, things like This War of Mine and, obviously Frostpunk itself originally. Like, go through their list and they're an eclectic studio that just jumps from genre to genre. They don't do sequels, they do new IP, and they kind of smash it every single time. It's impressive. So I think the sequel thing was a misstep, to be honest. It should have been a Frostpunk spin-off or something like that, because I really do think they've misunderstood the sort of unspoken, commodity-driven social contract that you have with a blowout hit and then when you make a sequel. And they've attempted to do it, but it's not their wheelhouse to sequelize something. On top of this, they've also changed a lot of shit, kind of almost maliciously in some cases. We'll have a look at the UI. I feel like the UI was changed because it had to be changed because they said so, because it's a sequel, because it's different. The UI's unreadable dog shit, and I've missed so many tips and things and menus, and it's just really unreadable. And again, in a vacuum, maybe this complaint wouldn't be a thing, but I have to compare it to the first game. So the UI is just absolutely god-awful. Then we get into the hex-based building. At least that's what you might think at a glance having a look at it. But they're not hexes. Some of them are 5, some 6. I've counted up to 9-sided ones, I'm pretty sure. But it's a sort of spackled mess, and honestly, that feels malicious. I don't know why you do that when so many people celebrate, praise, and love the min-maxing that came with the radial building around a generator in the first game. I can't help but think this was intended to undermine that, and that seems very mean-spirited. I think a lot of people from afar are looking at it going, I can't wait to min-max this hex system, and they're probably expecting it to be like the previous radial system, right? Some sort of innovative 11-bit special. No, it's not. It's an anti-fun implementation. Almost it seems like, and again, this is heavily speculated, but it really feels like they didn't like how hard people min-maxed the radial building, and as such have created a system that's very fucking hard to min-max. And look, the story is sort of nothing special, right? In fact, it's Force Awakens to New Hope. Right, they're just sort of trying to regurgitate the shock and awe from the first game, and it really misses the mark. For a hot second there, I thought something interesting would happen. You have the factions carry over from the previous game, and I went with the Faith people, and oil is introduced in this, which is just coal plus, honestly. And at one point, when I started to push my religion out, I mean, it's light-ish spoilers, I guess, but they were starting to go, well, let's do oil baptisms, that sort of stuff. And at that point, I was really on board. I was like, oh, wow, they're going to fucking go somewhere with this. This is going to be cool, right? I got that hunger from the first game. I was like, oh, here we go. And that was about it. It kind of, that's as hard as it ever punched. Big final finale. And in a sort of throwback to the beginning of the game and an attempt to hold the mirror up to you, it falls incredibly flat. So Scarlett, for someone who likes the game, you're being kind of harsh on it. Well, I am, because I feel like 11-bit, whether they're oblivious or hubris or whatever, or they just think they know better, they've declined to respect the reason why Frostpunk 2 is wish-listed like fucking crazy. And it's not because of all the stuff that they've decided to do here and double down on. However, much like I said at the beginning, circling way back, it feels like a lot of this has been built from a systems perspective for the Utopia Builder specifically. Probably reading too many Steam forums from super fanboys that only play survival mode. Again, probably 5% of the player base. So Utopia Builder works really well. And I've enjoyed it. I've stopped, started, restarted, poked and prodded it. Essentially, you can have some sort of, you pick a location with random resources in it, and random starting sort of factions. And as you start to pass a few laws in the council, which honestly, it's just the book of laws, but you don't pick so much as you pick what's voted for. And depending on how the population feels about you, honestly, or even their personal beliefs, some of them will just flat out refuse to vote for certain things on principle. You try and pass laws, you try and backroom politics. It works really well, but again, cool. It's an innovative, interesting, original kind of 11-bit style mechanic that should have been in its own original IP game, not in a sequel, but I've already said this many times. So it's good, it's well realized as a political sim. It's pretty cool, it's even-handed, but as you pass these laws, and you start to push what's called the city's zeitgeist in a certain direction, there's kind of 3 subcategories which are made up of 2 opposing ideals. For example, there's one where it's merit versus equality. So you can imagine how my colonies look. They're all just 100% merit-based. But then I think reason versus tradition, and then progress versus adaptation. And as you sort of lean into each of these areas a bit more, it will unlock more research on the research tree, and this is kind of where it's stronger. Like, some of them are pretty fucking funny how based they are. I push my merit for society all the way out to the point where you've got mandatory motherhood and locking women up and making them have kids full time. It's all pretty funny. And essentially you will have these kind of radical groups will emerge, and it's pretty mechanically considered in that one will spring up that kind of favors the 3 areas that you are favoring, you know, so you'll have a faction that will be something like adaptation, merit, and tradition, which I think are like the Frostbloods or whatever. And then after a little bit, their polar opposite will spring up in opposition as well. So there's no getting around it. And the game will force you pretty much to either just be a middling, keep everyone happy people pleaser, which arguably you don't have a lot of control over, more extreme policies, which in itself becomes a bit of a problem because the game will just keep ramping up in difficulty and cold. And so if you want to just be some sort of lukewarm bloke that sits in the middle, that's fine. The other options are things like, I had the Bohemians prop up in my playthrough and they kept doing protests and shutting down areas. So I researched prisons and thug squads, and I conscripted inmates, and I just sent them out to lock them up, put them in prison, exile them, and I just put all these fucking no-work hippie bohemian pricks out in the snow, and my city ran fucking like clockwork. Anyway, look, the video is getting a bit longer, and I think I've conveyed all my points. Again, to circle it back, as much as I fancy myself of the normies and a voice of my cavemen people, I still probably stand apart. Obviously, I play games for a living. I play lots of different games. I have a very eclectic, varied palette where I'll try everything. So I've gotten value out of it, and I can recognize some really cool mechanics under the hood. But at the same time, if you're not looking for a well-realized systems-based political sim where a lot of the focus is about pleasing these AI factions that probably represent your ideological real-life opposition, and you have to basically capitulate to these people's demands or fucking kill them or gulag them. The thing is, I don't think most normal people are looking for that. That's not their definition of fun. If it is for you, that's fine, cool, pick this game up. But again, whatever it was that got people to pick up Frostpunk in the first place, I really do think 11-bit misunderstood. And you might find that you have a critical darling here. Like, I could see a lot of these self-serious wanker reviewers praising this game highly because it lets you gulag your political opponents. But again, and to try and put a bow on it, much like The Last of Us 2, kind of pivoting and in a way betraying the cachet that they had with the base from the first game. I wouldn't say this is an intentional bait and switch here, but I do think it's a misunderstanding. So yeah, it's a good game. It's arguably a great game. Is it Frostpunk 2? Kinda not, maybe. And where it tries to just be Frostpunk 2 plus more, it actually kinda drops the ball a lot. Anyway, they're my thoughts. Team, might just leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.